Hello.
Hello, what's up?
What, okay, what are you doing right now? What are you doing right now? A puzzle? What are you
Yeah,
doing? Okay, well,
5,000 pieces.
it's not puzzle time. It's podcast time.
Oh, is that right now?
That
Okay,
is-
I'll get on right now. Bye.
Okay, all right.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh
good.
yeah. What's going on? I'm ready.
Hey, hi. I'm so excited. We're gonna talk to Noah and Belinda,
Yeah.
people science,
They're
and
doing great stuff. They're trying to bring rigor around the edges and fringes of science so that we can have some sort of samples and things that are normally not, they help people, but they aren't considered scientific, like marijuana and hallucinogens and different things, to try and bring rigor around that so that it starts to be more acceptable. So I'm really excited about what they have to say.
yeah, and also they're just such serious doctors and scientists. So to have people like that bringing in, these what used to be called alternatives into a system where we can study it. We all need that. The world needs it. So I'm really excited.
I agree. Well, here we go.
They're going to come on. Okay. For our guests watching or listening today, we have two incredible people. We have. I'm going to go with Belinda first. We have Belinda Tan. Please introduce yourself the way that you would like to be introduced.
I identify with a person who has been described as not quite fitting into a mold. I moved to the US when I was 4. English is not my first language. I spoke a dialect called Hokkien, and I grew up in a family where you just get in there and you do it. And I actually started my first day of kindergarten without knowing a word of English.
Wow.
And that was here in the US. I look forward to sharing more about what Noah and I have been up to as partners in so many realms of our life.
I guess professionally, I'm a physician, scientist, entrepreneur. But personally, I'm a small town kid, grew up in a family of artists.
And is what you do now so different from being an artist, really, at its essence?
Jesse, that's a great question. Belinda and I share views on this. The artists and the scientists both are explorers of frontiers, and they choose their own path, and they need their own courage to drive creativity and exploration. So there's a lot of similarities, and both Belinda and I are artists in our spare time, for sure. So
When did what was the problem that actually rose to the level that you wanted to start Science 37, and what does Science 37 do?
yeah, it's an important question that goes back further than Science 37, which is our drive to empower consumers and create access for a broader population of consumers or people to healthcare and to science. And so we had previously been part of translational research and had started a telemedicine company with some friends. All of our driving professional force was to use technology and our professional expertise to really democratize access to science and medicine. So we had prior experiences in the county health system here in Los Angeles, taking care of underserved, underprivileged people. And when we learned about how clinical trials run and how drugs are commercialized, it was presented as this massive societal problem that consumers can't access the hospitals. Like most consumers out there, most people out there don't have the means to come to UCLA or to Stanford, the ivory towers of academia and medicine. And so part of the driving force was to continue our vision of empowering consumers and bringing care to the people. And Science 37 essentially democratizes access to clinical trials. And instead of building the clinical trial around the physician, we built the trial around patients at home. And what that means is that anybody anywhere could participate in the research, no matter the color of your skin or your insurance or what town you live in. And so it was a massive transformation. We were told from the very beginning it's impossible. And I think that's one of our favorite challenges in life, is when we see a mission and a vision that is important to society and people tell us it's impossible. That's a good way to charge us up and get us excited about something.
Now, in one when you first hear that, if you're not sort of deep in the throes of biomedical research, you would say, oh, well, hospitals on purpose are pushing people away, but that's not really the case. We do, MD Anderson's a group we work with. We did a project about the last 75 years of cancer research. And, what you realize is 75 years ago, basically being treated for cancer meant you went and got radiated and then went and slept out on a park bench, right? And over the 75 years, it's come this incredible distance. So is Science 37 kind of an example of like, this was a necessary step? You built this company to extend the democratization of patients one step further, and in a logical extension where we're going to see that more and more happen?
I believe that is the case. Cancer and oncology is unique as a medical specialty because built into that practice is the ability to offer research to the patients as part of the care. So often, in many specialties, like we're both dermatologists, in terms of our training, offering a clinical trial is not something we learned routinely to do. But when you're a medical oncologist, that is something you do. So I think, there's a lot that's been advanced in oncology already in terms of that culture of how to integrate care and research. And what we did with, work at Science 37 with virtual clinical trials was something that we don't admit to coming up with that idea. It had been an idea that was already circulating among a lot of innovators within the world of clinical research. It's just putting it into place and implementing it was such a huge hurdle. And we also credit that there was, we were the right people at the right place at the right time. The smartphone, the iPhone was just becoming widely available, and then the Android. And so all of those things kind of fell into place. And I think what's happened even now with COVID, it's interesting. While we did start that company 6 years ago, there was still a lot of work to do to get broader adoption and ways to change the system. But there's a term of like crossing the chasm, when you get from the early adopters to the mainstream. And COVID has, I think, helped to cross the chasm in terms of bringing clinical research to this other new stage of enabling the trial to happen in the home.
I have a
Now,
question.
go ahead, Priscilla.
Well, I just have a question around this kind of shift what we really want to talk about what you're doing now, because to go from the trial being in the control of a doctor or a single, right? This kind of, it's a real ideological shift to say, we are the people that should be, figuring out our own well-being, our own, medical treatments. I mean, all of that, like, was that something that you shared the value of that? Were there other people that you kind of grew up with in medical school? Like, wait a minute, we got to do something different. And certainly your own story, Belinda, coming from a different country, going to kindergarten where you could not speak English, I think is what you said. You just jumped in. Like, it's like, how did you think it's out of the box? How do you get to that place where, no, we got to turn this around and try a different way? Because that's the innovation.
I think that's to you, Belinda, but I can say one thing about it, which is even before we started all these companies, one of my favorite mentors and friends is a guy named Larry Weed. He's the father of the problem-oriented medical record, first person to put electronic records in hospitals. He's famous amongst the prior generation of physicians. And he taught us that physicians aren't meant to be all-knowing oracles. We're meant to be guides. Your body, your mind, your heart, and your spirit that's the most important thing you have. And if you don't think that's valuable and you should be making the choices yourself on your own path, it's similar to transportation. If you had to ask a doctor for a prescription to take a plane, a train, or a bus or a car, you would throw your hands in the air. Like, these freedoms to choose our own path and take our own risks are really important. And so casting that notion of, physicians and healers are there to be guides, but it's really our own person and our own path to wellness. And so that requires a big shift in our society around education. We need to educate kids from the very earliest days around what is your health, what is wellness, and how do you make choices, understand, is this a car or is this a train or a plane? I think it's possible, and each of the steps we're taking, whether it's Science 37 to expand the reach in clinical research, or our new company, People Science, they're all driving around that same future vision where physicians and scientists are critically important, but each person has their own path to choose and walk, and their family. And that's kind of an underlying premise of all the work we do.
So,
And I think, oh,
please, Belinda, what were you going to say?
I think what has now shifted from the days of Larry Weed, he was already promoting these ideas over 40 years ago. From that day until today, the access to information has drastically changed. And we as physicians in our clinical practice, this 10 years ago, if not longer, patients who had access to information and would start to do their own research online would be coming to us with ideas of what they thought they had and shared a lot of information. And I think there's a culture in medicine of who owns all the information and who, as Noah said, who's the all-knowing oracle. And that's really taking a shift because of where knowledge and information is available. And, we recognize very early on that we need to be the supporters and we need to be the shepherds of information. We will not be the ultimate, holders of it and lock it up in medicine.
So in people science, so there's the scientific method, sort of, 1850 to now. It has certain universal principles that we know about how we look at certain kinds of problems. But 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, there were people called shamans who, were healers or whatever you want to call them. Most indigenous cultures have people who would take a tree bark or take something else, and how are we this problem, which is about efficacy of a treatment, how are we now trying to take a lot of things that have been excluded and we just don't have any idea, but we just say they're bad because there's no test? What is this company, People Science, going to do to help bring this edge further to what is considered medicine?
And also explain what it is too.
What People Science is? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the easiest answer is in the name. People Science is a platform and a company and organization focused on bringing science to the people. So everything we do is people forward, and we work on things that the people care about. And we use science as a universal language or architecture of inquiry. So nothing's changed about the scientific method in the past few centuries. From millennia ago, the scientific method wasn't available millennia ago. Original teachings or shamanistic teachings in general were observational and then hand-me-down knowledge. So, make observations and teach the next generation of healers. And that's the only form of communication. Then writing came along, etc. But the scientific method is really come up with an idea, form a hypothesis, and then design an inquiry to answer the question, is it true? So it's really, some people call science truth found out. That's all it is. And it doesn't matter what type of things you're asking, the same methodology applies. So we're not biased to the Western framing of the body or Eastern treatments or shamanistic treatments. They all can be, the questions can be asked in the same way. But what we are concerned at People Science is, what do the people care about? And so, the FDA and pharmaceutical companies care about one specific type of outcome and treatment algorithm and approval process for prescriptions. But it turns out that the people, they have very different ideas about what is wellness and prevention and health in general. And specifically across cultures, those ideas are wildly different. Western medicine tends to focus on the body and the brain, somewhat the mind, whereas other cultures and a broadened understanding of wellness focuses on the body, the mind, the heart, and the spirit. And so the scientific inquiry can be the same, but the framing of how you ask questions or what you're focused on are different. I think, just to answer your question directly. People Science is a platform where anyone with a good idea or a medicine, whether it's millennia old historical plants, or it's a new probiotic or a bacteria that's been built in a lab or a nutraceutical, anyone with an alternative medicine or an idea they want tested can come to us and we'll help them answer that question scientifically. And the important second part of what we do is we gather that data, we turn it into knowledge and translate it into a form of knowledge that people can understand. So a lay explanation of what we've learned. And so that translation of knowledge to the people is what we give back. And that's an important part of People Science as well.
How important is it that we have this methodology for, say, marijuana for sleep, or hallucinogenics for certain conditions? How important is it? Is this, I mean, you're going to, just because you say something means something doesn't mean it's actually going to be approved by the FDA. What it means is that, you're starting to build a body of research that can be used in a continuum. Belinda, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, a major idea that we're grappling with here is thinking about a new framework of science. We're seeing this as a new paradigm of science. And why is it new? The way that question, Jesse, is framed, and even questions we get from a lot of people who come from the world of clinical research is, how do you, very specific questions. How do you ensure data integrity? How do you make sure this is all of those questions that are meaningful and you have to think about? And that's what I'm going to call this world of rigorous clinical research and trials. And then you have this world of marketing research, which has its value because it's asking for consumer viewpoints and feedback. And what we're doing is we're trying to bridge this with this new paradigm, which is focusing on what consumers care about and doing it at scale. And I think this makes people very uncomfortable. For those who are familiar with the conventional ways of doing like observational studies, it's like, well, it's kind of like lightweight. It doesn't really test things in an explanatory way like trials. And we want to challenge that, because if you do things at scale, there's so much to be learned, and we can see what the power of looking at hundreds of different data points, for example, when you're looking at like non-content data according to someone's behavior, for example. So, that Chinese news AI company, Toutiao, is like designing very customized news feeds for users based on parameters that we don't even think about as important, but they've kind of created a signature of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we're doing here is it's over 100 years ago. I don't know if you guys have heard about the Flexner report. So the Flexner report, came out, and it was actually the first time where people were made aware that medicine and science really need to be one. So before that came out, the way that people got into med school was if you could pay for your tuition, you were in, because tuition paid for faculty, and the quality of care was like, and training was all over the place. Some people graduated from med school over 100 years ago, never having touched a patient. Like, that's what it was before. That came out, the Flexner report, lots of medical school closed down, and Johns Hopkins came up and said, medicine and science must be together. And we feel we're facing another major shift in how we think about health and science and wellness, and People Science is aiming to try to build that new way of looking at evidence around health.
Certain conditions, things that aren't, you could have depression. That it's very hard to diagnose. It's very hard to understand how a lot of the drugs that have even been approved for depression, how to repeat them in a clinical trial. So how do we take, it strikes me that you guys are very interested in a lot of areas where this isn't a lot there yet, but building this stuff in there is going to be super important.
The shift from Science 37 to People Science is changing from helping biotech and pharmaceutical companies with molecules that fix late-stage disease to focusing on questions of wellness and prevention and even betterment. in a broad population of people. I think that if you and changing from randomized controlled clinical trials to a new paradigm of science, and I think it's not either that's bad and this is good. It's both. That's good for one approach, and this is good for other things and other people.
In a sense, the problem that you're looking at in Science 37 is the edge at that time. Now a lot of places are trying to do that, even though Science 37 is one of the biggest, but others are trying to do it. Do you see this area, is that a similarity between these ideas? Is that you want to be at the edge of what has been figured out?
Yeah, I actually think we're building something new from ground up, rather than being at the edge of something existing. And it's particularly potent when one thinks about the mental health space. So Jesse, you bring up depression. That mental health has been a tremendous challenge in traditional clinical trials, for a lot of reasons, a very high placebo effect, and just, your behaviors they're so difficult to control, and the recruitment and the fine tuning of the right participant is so challenging. What we're doing is, by building a new paradigm of research from ground up, we can kind of solve for what is most problematic in the conventional and existing ecosystem, solve for that first, and also think about things with the lens of what was the biggest hurdle in the system that didn't work. And the biggest hurdle is getting the immediate engagement and trust with the individual participants of research. And to us, it's the people, it's the consumers, it's the patient, it's everyone. So we are very focused on that as one of our key strategies in the very beginning. And then from there, you get to scale and you can do the type of research that we're thinking about.
I still have a question though, because I think for some, if we're just people listening, we have the advantage of, we've been working with, we're trying to understand it. But again, what is it that we want people to be doing? What is it that people are sharing with us? And what are some of the, there are different types of, you're very interested in very specific medicines or plant-based work. So I want a little more information if we can have that.
I would answer that by saying the primary driver of people science is the people. We want people to be empowered with the tools that help them ask questions for themselves. Is this alternative medicine working for me? So if you think of the journey of the people can be consumers or patients or research participants. Throughout all of that, you should be asking questions and answering them scientifically, but the primary value is back to the person themselves. So providing tools through our platform, Chloe, that help the consumer answer for themselves. Is this medicine I'm taking helping me with my sleep? Do I feel better? And tracking these things. When you give the individual person the tools to answer questions for their own health, when you aggregate that data, you create vast amounts of knowledge. But the primary driver is to the individual people. And that question, we call it the freedom to inquire. Like, we believe very deeply, although it's not in our Constitution in the United States, I think most people agree you should have the freedom to ask the question, will this make me well? And just answer it for yourself. As scientists, that's an N of one, we call it. And then when you add those people together and get people to contribute their data and their experience back to the scientific community, you create knowledge. When you publicize that and publish it, that creates wisdom when other people pile on top of that their own experience. And so data into knowledge into wisdom is how this flows. And you can see it starts from the individual person.
So let's say that I'm a person, I take probiotics, I take some strain I've gotten at my health food store, and I think there's lots and lots of different things that you could take of probiotics. It's not regulated, right? So let's say I send it in. People Science gives me a way of thinking about that. It gives me a structure of self-reporting every day. And then, after a period of time, I sort of think, oh, okay, this means something. It really helped me with a certain aspect of my health. What happens then? Because it does have to scale in order for others to be interested in it. So do I send you a note and you say, oh yeah, okay, let's investigate and see if we get more people involved, or how do you guys see it over time, even if it's not figured out totally right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll answer it first. Belinda probably has some thoughts on it too. Think back to what I said about the people can be consumers, patients, or research participants. In the research participant category, there's both passive and active. So what you just described would be a passive observation of what's happening inside that person's life. They started product X, a probiotic, to help them with something, and passively that data is captured. Active would be a manufacturer of probiotics comes to us and asks us, can you study this in 500 people who are taking it? So observing 500 specific people working on their health in this way. That's more of an active process of observation and giving them the tools to specifically answer questions. That notion, both coming from both sides, is important to us as our patients who you can help study passively as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, one area that we will work on too is identifying what are the key metrics of wellness. What do people care about? And those will likely be universal across whatever you're taking. So if you're entering certain types of input about what's happening, you know, so like, how is my sleep? How's my bowel movements? What's my weight look like? Things like that. That will over time, you know, on the back end of what we intend to do with the data and looking at it in an aggregate way, give us insights about the knowledge. And then, you know, our vision for that is not only does it provide us with something we can share with the consumer and also share with care providers in terms of understanding what choices to help their patients make, but also provide insights for brands and products in what they want to iterate on and develop.
You know, a lot of these molecules or samples that we're going to be testing, reproducibility is an issue because we don't know that you can consistently get the same exact thing. Does people science have a feeling about reproducibility and how we think about that?
And you're thinking, and this is reproducibility of products, is that right?
The sample, you know, like, are you gonna, if you're looking at a strain of pot, are you gonna be able to get the same strain? If you're looking at probiotics, is it gonna be made the same way? As, you know, is that, I imagine you have to, because you're bringing the rigor to something that doesn't necessarily have rigor. Is this an issue, or maybe it's not an issue?
It's definitively an issue, and it's a great question. We take it super seriously. On our team, we have a PhD pharmacologist who can test any product for any ingredient in it. But it's not our primary driver. We expect our manufacturing partners to have the highest quality available for manufacturing. That said, one of the things we hope to do is to be a bridge between the FDA regulating single molecules and how we use really complex historical plants like cannabis, like ayahuasca, like mushrooms. Those things are that every single time they grow differently. Does that mean they're not a good medicine? Definitely not. We know that they work extraordinarily well in some mental health conditions. And so we hope to be a scientific bridge to help study things at a broader scale in a broader demographic of people to understand how to use these things most reliably. And some of that will be manufacturing and other parts will be clinical research. But, you know, the FDA, we're friends with the scientists there and think very highly of that process. It is challenging for them to regulate complex plants that grow different every time. So, but your point is well taken. The closer you can get to the product being reliable and reproducible, the easier it is to study clinically. And then most importantly, when the consumer chooses to use that to medicate themselves, or a physician chooses to prescribe something like that, we have to have the confidence that it's as close as nature gives us to predict the outcome. But our belief is that most of these things, you don't need a 0.1% variability in manufacturing. You can tolerate 5% differences in product manufacturing.
Belinda, I have a question for you, because you started in the beginning and said that you felt like you didn't quite, you know, you were sort of unusual, or you didn't fit in, or you didn't want to do things in the way that other people might be wanting to do it. And we don't know why, nature, nurture, whatever. You have an interesting background. from your perspective, what was it that wasn't working? What is the void in the marketplace? What were you seeing as doctors, and as researchers that you said, wait a minute, and this is beyond your first company. I'm talking about with people science now, and particularly studying these plants. What is it that that is not in the market that you said we need to do this? It doesn't fit. Things aren't fitting. Like just take it from there, because
Yeah, I think not a day passes when we don't hear from a friend or someone who hears about what we're doing and says, yeah, me too. Like I just bought this and tried this because someone told me it works, and I have no idea. I'm kind of trying to tweak it a bit and see if I'm better. And it's astounding that this is happening. And for us, certainly in the healthcare provider world, we hear it a lot from our friends. One of our good friends trains residents in psychiatry, and was saying that what he is doing now is specifically teaching them to ask patients like about cannabis and all of these specific types of products that they could be using, where patients might not be thinking that it's anything they need to talk about because it's so important. And we don't know enough about it, but just to be aware and to know. And for him, he said, gosh, if there were some knowledge to help me as the doctor to help my patient, that would be tremendous. So I think just like this feeling that Noah and I, we always come back to is like, well, why isn't this solved for? We can do it. We know how to do science. We can get people to generate the data together, and we can be the responsible stewards of how it's done. And if almost every person we talk to, this is relatable, it can be done. And I think one of the major issues is the financial incentives in the system that exists is not prioritizing the need to get this type of clinical evidence. And that's why we feel that if everyone as people says that they need it, those are the people we need to build value for and to build trust with. And if we have that power behind us, this movement, the sponsors, the products, the brands, people will come and will want to do more science.
Is yoga a form of something that can be tested?
Absolutely. Yeah, the tagline to our company is the place to test good ideas. It's not the place to test, this specific product or that one. It has to come in a bottle. It's anyone with a good idea. Belinda's more of a yogi than I am, that's for sure. But obviously she's more well than I am as well. So it could be the yoga she does. But some people would like to know, it's not to say every single thing we do for wellness or for ourselves has to be tested scientifically. Some inherent truths are obvious to the individual. It's not to say science is the only way to seek truth. But those types of questions, like you could just imagine if yoga is 3 times as effective as a tricyclic antidepressant pill and it costs half as much, wouldn't insurance companies really want to know that you just have to pay for your yoga membership?
So listen, as a person who is, I'm happy to say, has incredible anxiety, have had anxiety my entire life, was afraid to really take medication for it, have been a pretty, I practice yoga probably 5 times a week for 20 years. And it's, Jesse will say it doesn't really help, but it does, with his perception.
Well, it's really lessened all of her anxiety, and now she's totally fine.
Well, no. But there is obviously anyone who practices yoga who might be listening, we do know even after you practice that kind of what happens to your brain before and after, or, that there is, and I would love to sort of really study that further. So for me, hearing what you're saying and with people science is that could be a place where I could test. I could you would help me, maybe guide me what I might write down, or is that what we're going to be giving people, sort of helping with guidelines or questionnaires that they're sort of start to be built around something I'm very interested in for my own self-care. That's what I'm interested in. And how do these platforms also, we've got Chloe, we've got Fred. I've never met Fred yet, but what are these sort of, also technology platforms are going to help us a little bit? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, you bring up Fred, so I have to say something about it. The story behind Fred is that it was our placeholder for the people science product that's our knowledge portal. So it's where we provide knowledge which is of value to the public, and it is free education. Thus, Fred. So are we going to keep that name or not? We've had debates about it, but it's our knowledge portal. That's what it represents. And what you're describing, Priscilla, I think what remains something that is needed is the continuous feedback and the learning for individual people in their day-to-day health. We have all kinds of tools and apps available to us that are wonderful, but I think something that might be lacking is just the right amount of feedback in the form of knowledge and learning, so that you can know what to tweak and when to tweak it. There's going to be a lot of figuring out there, because you can't overwhelm someone with too much push content, and people can't spend all day tracking every piece of food they ate. And so there's a lot to figure out there. But we're confident we can get there. But I think finding the right way where people are essentially, they've adopted a way of life where they're trying to learn and just get better, and understand it through the lens of science. And I think that's one of the key aspects of building trust and engagement with the people that we aim for.
I don't think we have enough time to you're gonna have to come back, because there's so much to discuss, and we haven't even talked about, it just goes a lot deeper, because I think that this idea of alternative, bringing that in, that this is additive, we've been learning about that with you. So I think what we're going to have to do is, and I'm sorry, there's construction behind me, have you come back and continue the conversation. We haven't really gotten into the Belinda, who you are, Belinda. So that might just, you come on by yourself, and then Noah can go. There's just too much to discuss in one session. So.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much. This is great.
So thank you. It's exciting.
Really fun.
And it's wonderful. And let's come back, because there's more to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
They're doing incredible work. I don't even know. I feel like we have to help our listeners and watchers. There's so much that we haven't really even unpacked yet around what they're doing, but it's important work, and they're the kind of people that, it hasn't happened yet. And so can't quite articulate what it is, but once it's out there in the world, and once they're doing that work, everyone's going to be, I think, jumping on. So
I agree.
people science.
Okay.
All right.
See you on the next one.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.